Of traveling, the state of Florida still has checkpoints set up at our border, checking in with travelers from hotspots around the country trying to come to our state.
We've screened almost 20,000 people coming from the New York City area and from New Orleans. The requirement to self-isolate, I think that that's been effective.
However, not everybody agrees with that statement by the governor. Of the 3 major interstates that cross into Florida, only 2 of them have those checkpoints. And as On Your Side's Jeff Vallon is finding out, that might be only part of the problem.
I've noticed the past few weeks a lot more increase in the out-of-state tax. New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, coming down 75 where there's no checkpoint.
Long-haul trucker Lee Thorson has been driving big rigs for more than 20 years. He's one of many people questioning why, with forced checkpoints where I-10 and I-95 enter Florida, there are none on I-75, a north-south conduit from Michigan to Florida.
Especially with 75 being so close. You know, I mean, it only takes maybe an hour and a half to cut across.
Not to mention other secondary roads even closer to the first coast. But why have the 2 checkpoints that are in place? I drove north into Georgia, then back down through the I-95 checkpoint Monday. I asked the agent which state's plates they're targeting. Her response, quote, New York, New Jersey, and something, Colorado or something, end quote. They can't turn people back, so they're simply giving information about the governor's emergency order 20-86. It says people from coronavirus hot zones must quarantine up to 14 days while they're in Florida. Thorson says there lies another concern.
There's no way to really know if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
So are the checkpoints doing what they were at least hoped to be doing?
That this is effectively accomplishing anything?
Probably not.
And the cost is unclear. We've reached out to the Department of Transportation, which has declined interviews and referred us to the governor's emergency order. We then reached the governor's office, which referred us back to the DOT. At the Georgia-Florida state line on 95, Jeff Vallon, First Coast News, On Your Side.